Okay, thank you. Welcome to the Rochford District Council Remote Planning Committee meeting, and welcome to anyone watching this via live stream. Going through the agenda, item number 1 is apologies for absence, and I believe that we have apologies from Councillors Michael Hoy and Simon Wootton. Agenda item number 2, substitute members attending. Councillor Stuart Wilson will be substituting for Councillor Michael Hoy, and Councillor Mrs. Laureen Shaw will be substituting for Councillor Simon Wootton. Item number 3 is non-members attending. Sonia, have you got anybody that will be attending?
There are none.
There are none, thank you very much. Agenda item number 4, minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of January 2020. If seems a long time ago now. Are members in agreement with these minutes? Thank you very much. We're now moving on to item number 5, declarations of interest. Would anybody indicate if they've got any declarations of interest to make? I can't see any. Okay. Right, we now move on to...
Chairman,
yes.
Councillor Mrs. Mason is indicating.
Sorry, yeah, okay. Councillor Mrs. Mason,
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. This isn't necessarily a declaration of interest, but it's a statement I need to make. I set aside last night to prepare for this meeting, and I want to place on record that despite the council being constantly advised and being aware of the problems I receive, that they have consistently persisted in failing to provide documents that I can access. I have done my best to prepare for this meeting, but in view of the council's intransigence, I will be finding it quite difficult. Thank you.
okay, Councillor Mason, Mrs. Mason, sorry. I believe Sonia will take that on board and see if there's anything we can do for the future. And I hope you feel better than you actually sound.
It's pardon?
I hope you feel better than you actually sound. You sound like very croaky.
I have found this very difficult.
Yeah. Okay, we'll move on to item number 6 then, which is the Essex Coastal Recreational Disturbance Avoidance and Mitigation Strategy, in brackets that's described as RAMS, supplementary planning document, and that is the SPD 2020. The presentation will be made by Mr. Daniel Goodman, Team Leader, Strategic Planning, will be introducing this report. We also have officers Marcus Houghton and Mrs. Yvonne Dunn in attendance, and between the three of them, hopefully they should be able to answer any questions or clarify any issues that you may wish to raise. So I'll move over to you now, Mr. Goodman.
Thank you, Chair. So this agenda item relates to a supplementary planning document that's been prepared on behalf of the council. It relates to a project that the council has been engaged in for around 18 months with 11 other local authorities across Essex, and basically it's to put in place a strategy to avoid and mitigate the impacts of new housing on coastal habitats. So it was something that Natural England raised as an issue through the preparation of individual local plans, and it has kind of necessitated a joint solution, which is the whole purpose of the RAMS. So members will have previously seen the final RAMS strategy in April 2019. And late last year and early this year, the draft SPD was seen by council and recommended that it goes out to public consultation. So this item is now reporting back on the outcomes of that public consultation, and recommending that the committee recommends to council that it be adopted as part of the council's planning documents. So just as a quick overview on the purpose of the SPD, really. So SPDs don't contain policies, they only contain guidance but nevertheless, they are useful in terms of giving applicants an understanding of how policies will be applied. And the RAMS is quite a difficult thing to get your head around if you're not used to it. So clearly the SPD has been prepared with the intention of making that a simpler process for people applying for planning permission for housing development. And the crux of the RAMS really is that every new house built in the district that's a net increase, so not replacements, has to provide a tariff of around £120. And those tariffs are pooled and then will be used to provide that mitigation. And that mitigation could be anything from human resource. So as we'll get on to, there is an ambition for there to be a county-wide resource, to physical things like signs, advising people to keep their dogs on their leads and things like that. So it's a real wide scale of mitigation. So just to quickly summarize the outcomes of the SPD, so the consultation rather, so there was a reasonable response from 146 individual comments, and 12 of those were made by residents of Rochford, and quite a lot of others were made by residents of other Essex authorities. The comments themselves, the changes that have been made based on these comments are listed in the report to item 6, so I won't read them all out, but fundamentally most of them were just matters of detail and clarity, making it clear how it would work, and addressing anything that respondents felt wasn't clear. Fundamentally, Natural England are supportive of this approach, and are supportive of councils getting in place an SPD to mean that the RAMS will be functioning effectively. So I suppose just one last point to make on this item is that because it's a legal responsibility of the council to discharge the habitat regulations when it comes to planning decisions, failure to adopt the SPD doesn't actually change the council's responsibilities in any way. There's still a need to implement the RAMS or an alternative, but it's clearly its officers' views in recommending this item that the SPD helps make the whole process much simpler for both the council and any applicants for planning permission, and hence why the recommendation is that it is recommended to council for adoption. So I'm happy to take any questions on this item, if you wouldn't mind letting me know if anyone has their hand raised.
Okay, members, are there any questions that you wish to raise with Daniel? I think the most pertinent point is that, we do not discharge ourselves of any legal responsibilities if we don't take this situation on board. I understand, Daniel, that sharing the responsibilities will also share the financial costs across the county. So really, unless members have any other concerns, I would suggest that we move on to the recommendations that we forward to full council in relation to this item. Okay, members, well, nobody seems to be indicating that they have any questions on this item. We then move on to paragraph 10.1 on page 6.10. There are 2 recommendations to council. Can I ask if members are agreeable that we take both of these items together, recommendations 1 and 2? I will gladly read them out if that would clarify the situation. Item number 1 is that the Essex Coastal Recreation Disturbance and Avoidance and Mitigation Strategy, RAMS, Supplementary Planning Document, SPD, set out in Appendix B, be adopted. And item number 2 is that you said, we said report and adopted statements set out in Appendix A and C respectively be published on the council's website. Are members in agreement with those 2 being forwarded to full council? I can't see anybody Not indicating that they're in agreement. Right, we will take that as being accepted by members and declare that motion has been carried.
Chairman,
Yes,
we do need to do a roll call.
Okay,
please.
okay. Over to you, Sonia.
So you're voting as to whether or not you want a recorded vote, or voting for, against, or abstaining on recommendations 1 and 2. Councillor Mrs Lumley.
No, and agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Mason. Councillor Mrs Mason.
Mrs Mason has her hand raised, Sonia.
Okay.
No, it's okay. I couldn't. I had trouble. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I had trouble clicking on the right thing. Okay, goes to the vote for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Shaw.
No recorded vote for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Sperring.
No recorded vote and for the motion.
Councillor Mrs Weston.
No recorded vote and for the motion.
Councillor Wilson.
No recorded vote and for the motion.
That's unanimously for, Chairman.
Thank you, members. We'll now move on to agenda item number 7, which is the Essex Coastal Recreation Disturbance Avoidance and Mitigation RAMS Partnership Agreement 2022 to 2023. And again, Daniel Goodman, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. So this item is clearly relates back to the previous item. So as I briefly mentioned, the RAMS is a partnership approach across many local authorities in Essex, and it has been operating successfully as a partnership. So the strategy itself has been developed through the partnership, and the SPD consultation, and all these things have been managed as a partnership. So officers have been attending steering group meetings and obviously representing the council's interests at those meetings. This partnership agreement really is to enshrine a further kind of 3-year programme of partnership under the RAMS to actually move then into more of the implementation phase. So as I mentioned previously, the main outcome of the RAMS is expected to be a per dwelling tariff of around £120. And one of the main things that's kind of been raised through the RAMS really is the fact that a lot of people visit coastal habitats outside of the area they live, and therefore that the impact of housing built in one area actually is quite broad when it comes to impacting other areas. And therefore certainly Natural England's view, and the view that's kind of shared by the steering group, is that actually it's very ineffective both in terms of human resource and financial resource to try to discharge the RAMS in 12 different chunks, if you like, across the 12 different local authorities. So this partnership agreement is based on an offer, if you like, from Chelmsford City Council to become the accountable body for the purposes of the RAMS for a period of 3 years. And what that would mean in practice is that the small amount of human resource that this project is expected to create out of the tariffs would be, if you like, managed by Chelmsford City Council, but under clearly the direction of the steering group making up all the authorities. And the tariff contributions collected by the local authorities will be pooled as part of the project, and then the steering group and other groups will determine how best to spend that money. I suppose the one thing I would say on that, however, is that clearly the RAMS is set up on an already identified package of mitigation. Therefore, there is not going to be much discretion, if any, for decisions to be made exactly how to spend the money. But clearly there are practical decisions to be made, i.e., if there's in principle agreement that signage is needed, there's a practical need to determine, how to procure that signage, where it's going to be placed, and things like that. And so the partnership agreement aims to achieve all of that. And the idea is very much that all the authorities will be entering into it for a period of 3 years. In terms of the council's role in it, I mean, the view of officers in recommending this item is that the amount of money that the council will itself collect from the RAMs is likely to be insufficient to deliver anything substantive, or at least it would have to be pulled over such a significant period of time that it ceases to become effective mitigation. So our view on this very much is that there's a lot of advantages in terms of operating this as a partnership, and clearly the council will still have a role to play in terms of managing how that's done. And there are various clauses, if you like, set out in the partnership agreement in terms of, if the council was unhappy with how the partnership was going, its right of withdrawal and all those things. So I suppose that's probably all I have to say on this item. But again, I'm more than happy to take any questions on it as directed by yourself, Chair. Sorry, Chair, I think you're muted.
Sorry, thank you. Thanks, Daniel. Are there any points, members, that need clarification or wish to raise? Right, Councillor Mrs. Mason, first of all, and then Councillor Wilson. Councillor Mrs. Mason.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I must admit I like the principle of the idea. I like the fact that Chelmsford are overseeing it, because I think they're a very good authority. But the couple of bits I've picked up that I'm quite concerned about, there seems to be an inconsistency in the allocation of charges. In one paper, I believe it said 10 and 5%, and the other it said 9.1 and 4.5. I also question why two authorities have a lower contribution. Also, the figures in 7.1 are not included, and the total costs are not included. There's no real, there's a sharing of costs in there, but there's no indication of the overall cost, which I set relatively minor points that can be sorted. But the major problem I have with this is the steering group and the proposal that the steering group is made up of officers. I think if something of this importance to our council, it should be made up of members with officer support. And there's also seems to be no consideration of what would happen if we became a combined authority to this agreement. There's no knowledge of that. So those are points that I'd like clarified.
Do you want to go with those first of all, Daniel, and then we'll move on to
Yes.
Councillor Wilson?
Yes, that's absolutely fine. So in terms of the, I'll address the reason why a couple of authorities are being asked to pay slightly less. The main reason for that is that the way the RAMS has been managed is on the basis of what have been called zones of influence from the coastal habitat sites, and that's generally trying to estimate how far the average person would be likely to travel to visit those habitat sites. But it just so happens that Brentwood and Uttlesford in particular, only an incredibly small part of their authority area is actually captured by one of these zones of influence. And clearly, as they are not coastal authorities, I think the view was taken in drafting this that actually they are unlikely to receive any of the benefit really from the mitigation package. And therefore, whilst there's a legal requirement for them to be involved, as a matter of fairness, it seems unfair to ask them to contribute the same as the coastal authorities. So hopefully that shines a light on that issue. In terms of inconsistency with the figures, I mean, I'll have to confess I'm not aware of exactly what the inconsistencies are. Although what I can say is that the council's being asked to fund approximately £3,500 per year, a slightly lower figure in this year, given that we're already significantly into this administrative year. And that's really just to cover the aspects of the partnership that could not be covered from the tariff. And that might include things like kind of general administration around recruiting staff and all those kind of things. So I am confident that £3,500 a year is the right figure. If there are areas where that's inconsistent, then I apologise. And the recommendation from officers on that issue is that actually it can be met from the existing planning policy budget, which falls within the local development framework reserve. Clearly, if those costs changed markedly, then certainly, you know, we would reassess that and if necessary bring that as a discussion piece for members. In terms of the member overview, I think I think it's a fair point. Although the way that it's kind of been looked at in terms of this partnership is that the decision making for the steering group is likely to be quite low level and therefore not big picture matters. And so given that the RAM strategy already identifies the mitigation package, the amount of discretion that the steering group made up of officers or members could ever have is quite limited. And so the way that the partnership has been pitched, if you like, is that the steering group will be officer led, but fundamentally it's for each set of officers to have to go back to their council and seek whatever permission that they might need. One of the recommendations for this item, which obviously I'm sure we can get onto, is that Marcus, as Assistant Director for this service, be delegated authority in consultation with Councillor Ward to make decisions that are necessary to discharge this partnership. And clearly, if Councillor Ward felt that there was a need to invite the committee's view on issues, then I'm sure that we could do that. I'm just conscious too of creating a disproportionate burden on both members and officers in terms of discharging kind of very low level decisions. So I apologise if there are any other questions included in that. I'm more than happy to answer them, but hopefully that was all of the questions.
Councillor Mrs Mason, do you wish to come back on that?
Yes, it certainly covers the financial aspects. I'm not sure that I would call something like Wallasey Island a low-level decision, and our coastal area is a vast point of amount of our land area, and I think it's quite important that members are involved. And I'm unhappy with the way that this is officer dominated. I do think members should be more involved, and I do think that that's a flaw in this agreement, and it's the only flaw that I see. But you haven't answered the question about what would happen if we became, as anticipated, a combined authority, and there's no knowledge of that in the report.
Well, I suppose in all honesty, that question probably hasn't been raised, and that may well be an oversight on our side. I think, if I'm being honest in practical terms, you know, my limited understanding possibly of the prospect of local government reorganisation is that it will be years in the making. And I think it's probably worth saying that this partnership agreement has an end date of 2023, and each authority within the partnership does have a right of withdrawal with 6 months notice. Therefore, I imagine it would be quite simple for the partnership to cease to be using the clauses within the partnership agreement. I take the point on board. I'd be more than happy to seek clarification from other local authorities in the partnership in advance of council, possibly as to whether or not that needs specifically addressing in the partnership agreement. But I would say I think there are sufficient clauses within the agreement itself to protect any one council's situation if that event did come to be. Clearly the council could decide at any time that it wishes to serve notice to leave the partnership, and if it knew it was on that path, then possibly that would be a course to take.
Thank you, Daniel. That's really clarified the situation with the current combined authority, which leaves the only concern that I have is the lack of member involvement. I don't think it should be necessarily Councillor Ward. I don't think we should impose it on an assistant director who's obviously very busy, and I think that the representation should be member-led. But apart from that, you've answered the questions. Thank you.
Councillor Wilson, before I come on to you, I think two officers, Mrs. Dunn and Marcus Hutton, wish to probably add some comment to what Daniel's just said. So before we move on to you, Councillor Wilson, can Yvonne, would you like to come in, and then Marcus?
Yeah, I'm possibly going to say the same as what Marcus might say, but what I would just sort of confirm what Daniel said, that, should circumstances change with, government structure, but there are a number of partnership agreements that will need to be reviewed as a result of changes of that nature. And this would just be one of those. Each authority will find themselves in the same situation, and it will be a matter that we would have to sort of, revisit other partnership agreements as well to find a solution to how they would work going forward. So I just wanted to confirm that.
Thank you. Marcus, do you wish to add anything?
No, I think the point's been covered. Thank you.
Okay. Can I just ask Dan, before we go on to Councillor Wilson, one assumes that there will be routine reports coming to this committee regarding any actions that are taken in relation to this joint project?
Yes, so there certainly can be. I think I've said in the report that that those reports could be taken to council, but it would seem to make sense that they come here perhaps first or instead. I think just one thing I would reiterate on that issue really is what the partnership's likely to deliver, if you like, out of the contributions is not going to be transformational projects. I think it's fair to say. Clearly, I would be more than happy if there was decisions to be made about big ticket items, if you like, that have a clear impact on the district's interests. Certainly we would take that to the committee or council, and we would certainly seek member endorsement of that decision. I think what I'd say is that the vast majority of decisions are likely to be far more around how and where to procure signage, and how and where to work, to maybe propose slight minor rerouting of paths and things along those lines. So we'd be more than happy to keep members up to date from that, and if they feel necessary, above a certain point, obviously to seek permission for that. I suppose the reason why the steering group is officer led in this circumstance really is just because there may be a need for lots of very minor, rapid decisions that don't really have much of a financial bearing, but nevertheless need to be made. And I suppose that's why it's been pitched as it has, really, as an officer-led steering group, but that one that seeks endorsement from members when required. But certainly, I mean, we can report into the committee or council, on a quarterly or 6-monthly basis if that works, on decisions that are due to be made, decisions that have been made, and progress along those lines.
Thank you. I think that might reassure members along those lines. Thank you for your patience. Councillor Wilson, over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. It's really only for my my own benefit. I know that we mentioned in the report, and Daniel mentioned it, about the operating across boundaries, and those are the sort of intra-Essex boundaries. Are there any other circumstances where we would liaise with people like Kent or consult with Kent? Because although we haven't got a land boundary with them, obviously there is a wildlife boundary effectively.
So the short answer is yes. So from a practical perspective, the way that Natural England has set up the RAMs is trying to use just distinct boundaries where they can, just to try and make it manageable. But certainly there is a RAMs project in Kent. There's a RAMs project in Suffolk. There's RAMs projects all over the place. I know there's one in the Solent, which was a bit of a pilot. So certainly when it comes to probably Suffolk and Kent, there is a need to have a dialogue. I suppose because this is people going from their house to the habitat site, it's unlikely that a significant number of people jump over the Dartford crossing to go and visit North Kent to walk their dog, for example. I think the issue is probably more pronounced around the Suffolk boundary, and certainly there's been a lot of conversation with them where you've got, you know, Colchester tendering and authorities along those lines who might reasonably walk their dogs or exercise or whatever just over the Suffolk coast. So there is alignment there, but from the perspective of collecting the RAMs tariff and implementing the RAMs, we have to work to some boundary, and that's why the county boundaries have been drawn as they have been. But certainly they have attended steering group meetings in the past to give updates on their projects, and if there was an opportunity to align, then I have every expectation that it will be aligned. You know, there won't be a circumstance where we're doing you know, the opposite to one another on the same stretch of coastal path. You know, I don't think that would ever happen.
Thank you.
Anything else, Councillor Wilson?
No, that's it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Members, are there any more questions that you wish to raise with Mr. Goodman, bearing in mind his comments regarding either a quarterly or 6-monthly update for this committee? I think would be more appropriate. Taking that in as an accepted process, would members now consider voting on the recommendations 1, 2 and 3 together, please? Councillor Mrs. Mason.
Just a question on clarity. I mean, this isn't, I know the finances involved are very small, but sometimes small decisions have quite large impacts, and it's not the finances that I'm concerned about, it's the impact on the area. I know the officer has said that they will decide when they need member involvement, but what concerns me is how that decision is made, because we're still allowing the officers to determine when members are advised. So I do have concerns about the steering group makeup, but having said that, we have very regular reports. I suppose that will mitigate it to some extent, but I remain uncomfortable with the makeup of the steering group. Thank you.
I accept your comments, Mrs. Mason, but I think at the moment the best course of action that I would propose is that we ask Mr. Goodman to ensure that we have a quarterly report of any issues, and that if there are other areas that we need to attend to urgently, that this is brought to us on an ad hoc basis, and if necessary, we will arrange a meeting to discuss the situation. Would that be more confident for you, Mrs. Mason?
I think, yes, it helps, but the onus is still with the officers and not with the members, and that's where I have a concern. But obviously, you know, I know this has happened in the past and it has worked well, but that doesn't mean that we can't change things and improve them. So yes, it answers the question. I accept that probably majority don't agree, but I still feel that there should be more member involvement and less reliance on officer determination. But that's my opinion, and I accept that not everyone will agree with that.
Thank you very much. Okay, members. Taking account of Councillor Mrs. Mason's comments, can we vote for these three recommendations together? I will read them out to you again. That the council enters into a partnership agreement attached at Appendix A, that the authority be delegated to Assistant Director, Place and Environment to discharge the council's responsibility under the partnership agreement in consultation with the portfolio holder for planning, that it be agreed that the annual cost of around £3,500 be met from the existing local development framework reserve. Unless I see any hand icons, I assume that we will do a roll call on all three items. Okay, nobody has indicated. Do you want to do the roll call, Sonia?
So, Councillor Mrs. Lumley, please.
No and agreed.
Councillor Mrs. Mason.
Please record vote and abstain. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Shaw.
No and agree.
Councillor Sperring.
No and agreed.
Councillor Mrs. Weston.
No and agreed, Chairman.
Councillor Wilson.
No and agreed.
That's 5-4 and 1 abstention, Chairman.
Thank you, members. I therefore declare this motion has been carried. That concludes the meeting. Thank you very much for attending, and I now declare this meeting closed at 10:36. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.